By March 2017, WikiLeaks had exposed the CIA's infiltration of French political parties, its spying on French and German leaders, its spying on the European Central Bank, European economics ministries, and its standing orders to spy on French industry as a whole. We revealed the CIA's vast production of malware and viruses, its subversion of supply chains, its subversion of antivirus software, cars, smart TVs, and iPhones. CIA Director Pompeo launched a campaign of retribution. It is now a matter of public record that under Pompeo's explicit direction, the CIA drew up plans to kidnap and to assassinate me within the Ecuadorian embassy in London, and authorized going after my European colleagues, subjecting us to theft, hacking attacks, and the planting of false information. My wife and my infant son were also targeted. A CIA asset was permanently assigned to track my wife, and instructions were given to obtain DNA from my 6-month-old son's nappy. This is the testimony of more than 30 current and former US intelligence officials speaking to the US press, which has been additionally corroborated by records seized in a prosecution brought against some of the CIA agents involved. The CIA's targeting of myself, my family, and my associates through aggressive extrajudicial and extraterritorial means provides a rare insight into how powerful intelligence organizations engage in transnational repression.
Good Monday. It's your host, Odell, here for another Citadel Dispatch, the interactive live show focused on actual Bitcoin and freedom tech discussion. That intro clip you just heard was Julian Assange speaking for the first time since he's been a free man. Quite the indictment on the U.S. intelligence services. And I have to give him a lot of credit for being out there in public after everything he's been through. If I was him, I would have taken a little bit more time off. But he's a man who cannot be stopped. But anyway, with all that said, we have a great group joining us today. We'll be talking about the newest mining pool to enter the Bitcoin fray, ocean mining, with a focus on trying to solve a lot of the mining centralization issues that we've seen crop up. I have multiple guys from the team here. We have Mark, who's one of the co-founders of Ocean. How's it going, Mark?
Hey, pretty good, Matt. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. And I think we have Luke here. I don't know if we have Luke here. Luke, are you here?
Yep.
Nice. So that's two of the three co-founders. The third co-founder isn't joining us today, but we have Bitcoin Mechanic, who's been kind of the face of the operation. How's it going, Mechanic?
Yeah, real good, man. Thanks for having us.
What's your official title, Mechanic?
Chief Boiling Officer.
Chief Boiling Officer in charge of boiling the oceans. And we have Jason here, who's like kind of low-key one of the most important people at Ocean, I believe, I think, over there, doing a lot of the hard behind-the-scenes work. How's it going, Jason?
All right.
Awesome. And Jason, by the way, has one of the best backgrounds we've had in dispatch history because he appears to just simply being in forest.
I'm actually just outside.
Fair enough. Well, you sound great. You probably have the best mic quality out of all of us. So guys, I don't know where to start. I think the best place to start is why Ocean, and like why are you guys doing what you're doing, and why should people care? And I guess we'll kick that off to Mechanics since he's gotten quite good at this.
Thanks. Yeah. Why ocean? Because Bitcoin mining has really become more and more centralized over the years. It's not what it was a long time ago. It's a very far cry from how it was described in the white paper and what we envisioned here. It's become bifurcated. It's become this separate element of the Bitcoin ecosystem. There's none of those principles like not your keys, not your coins, don't trust, verify. In mining, there's been a whole lot of trust. There's been a whole lot of closed source everything. There's been a whole lot of centralization around manufacturers. And it's just been its own thing, and it's gone off into crypto kind of territory that just doesn't carry with it the same kind of ethos that exists in the hodl culture. So we came around trying to say we need to fix this. You can't come up with naive solutions either, like saying everyone just needs to solar mine and that's it. Never even use a pool. You have to come up with a pool that wants to allow miners to take their sovereignty back without having to make over-the-top self-sacrifices for it, like wait 3 years to solo mine a block and get all the rewards themselves. That's not realistic for most miners, so they're gonna have to pool together. But how much the pool does is entirely up to the ethos of the people running the pool and the demands made by miners. So when it comes to Ocean, we're saying we don't want to hold your coins. We want to pay you out when we solve blocks. We also don't want to have control what goes in the blockchain. We want that to be your decision as well. All we want to do is coordinate reward splits. And by the way, we don't want to do that in an opaque manner. We want everyone to know what those splits are and how we got there. We want you to be able to verify all that. There were lots of principles that we could adhere to, and we have done. But far and away, the biggest thing about what it is we want to do is make miners actually construct templates on the miner side rather than on the request. Even if the pool gives you multiple options for what you might like, we don't want to be the ones even selecting that stuff. And we want to push it out one rung because there's only so many pools you can have, right? I'll round off with this point. You can't have more than, let's say optimistically, you can have 100 pools out there. That's about the best you can do. After that, variance and everyone will just solo mine. So if pools are making templates, that means you necessarily have at most 100 people in the world deciding what gets in the blockchain. That's not decentralized. So you have to push it out one rung and say, well, it's the miners actually, because there are tens of thousands of mining operations. There's only 100 or so pools. So you have to push that out one rung and say that's up to the miners to do. Then if and when censorship starts to become more of a less of a theoretical issue and actually manifests as it's ripe to at the moment, we have to be able to say, well, you've got to go and find miners. And by the way, we don't know who any of them are. All you have to go on is a Bitcoin address. You have to go and find that miner who constructed that block and then, do whatever punitive stuff you want to do to him. Coming after the pool is useless. So that was long and short. That's why Ocean exists. And that's what we're doing.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, I would say for some context right now, Bitmain, which is one of the largest manufacturers of ASICs in the world, is also one of the largest mining pools. And between them and their proxies, they control about 50% of the hash rate. They construct the blocks of about 50% of Bitcoin blocks that are distributed across the network. And when we say construct the blocks, that means someone is, who is deciding which transactions go in a block and get confirmed into Bitcoin. And obviously, I mean, I think when you have that kind of centralization, I think Bitcoiners should be very concerned. This is something that many of us have been watching and been concerned about for a long time, but it hasn't really seemed like any real progress has been made. I will say, like, for a little bit of context, is maybe Bitmain had even more control over the network in 2017 or something like that. But it hasn't gotten significantly better, let's put it that way. Now, one of the things that we cover a lot is that Bitcoin mining is one of the hardest businesses to be in the world, being an actual miner. I think less so people realize like running a mining pool is probably up there as well, especially launching a new mining pool. And I'm curious, Mark, on your thoughts about how like I mean, when did Ocean launch? Ocean launched like 8 months ago, I think.
Yeah,
Um,
10 months and 1 week about.
yeah, like how, what are your thoughts on the last 10 months of spinning up basically a brand new mining pool from scratch and trying to join the market?
Yeah, it's definitely been a wild ride so far. When we launched Ocean, we did it as a rebrand of Eligius. So it's not exactly a new mining pool, but it is a new brand. And so I guess we did have the advantage of having Luke and Jason, the two guys on the call here, running very successfully one of the earliest mining pools in Bitcoin. I think their pool dates back to 2011, so they were one of the first ones, the first one to put their name in the Coinbase. So we definitely had a bit of a head start in terms of the tech, and when Luke and I were originally kind of spitballing ideas of this was like pre-Ocean. Our parent company is called Mummelin, so this was even pre-Mummelin. We were just sort of new entrepreneurs deciding to go into business together and looking at the landscape. And Luke had kept the Legius, the domain, active. I think that they ran the pool successfully until about 2017. It was shut down, and Luke and Jason went on to pursue other interests successfully. But Luke kind of kept the domain active with the hopes that one day he would resurrect Eligius. And it just turned out that what the Bitcoin ecosystem was facing in terms of the centralization threats, it was just the prime opportunity to bring it back. And so it was. I guess the challenge was in terms of just the similar challenge that every startup faces in terms of coming up with seed capital to fund the operation, putting together a winning team to build the products and the tech, and then getting the name and the brand recognition out there to try to capture some of the market share. But we were fortunate to have two of the best developers in the space, being Luke and Jason here. And Jason, I think, as you mentioned, is kind of like quietly one of the most influential people in the space due to all his contributions. And then we added some really key people like Bitcoin Mechanic, who can describe and articulate this stuff better than anybody else. So I think we put together probably the best team in the business, and that actually made it easy for us to actually start making some progress. And we were fortunate to have the initial seed investment from Jack Dorsey, along with some very wise advice from him to adopt the new name for the pool, because originally we were going to call it Eligius. And funny joke inside, between me, Luke, and Ian, none of us could agree on how to pronounce the old pool. I said Eligius, Ian said Eligius, and Luke would say Eligius. And Jack was like, fellas, you can't even agree on how to say the pool. I think you should come up with a new name. And so we chose Ocean after a little bit of time going to the marketing drawing board. But yeah, it's been great. 10 months in, and I think we're doing great, and we're really hopeful for the future.
I mean, Ocean's a great name. Definitely, that was a good. That not. I don't even know how to pronounce it now. I always pronounce it Eligius, but Eligius always has a special place in our hearts, especially if you've been in Bitcoin for a long time. So not to diminish the history of the name, but it's cool to have a fresh start, and it's just a very clean, punchy name. I mean, Jason, with all that said, what I mean, we were talking early, on, but before everyone else joined, before we even went live, we were talking about the recent downtime you guys faced, and you being on the ground, getting it back up and running. Do you want to go into that a little bit about? I mean, when the hurricane hit, Ocean went down for a little bit. What did that look like from your side?
I mean, without getting too into like kind of our behind the scenes security aspects, we do have redundancies in place. So there is that. But this is just a once in a lifetime thing. I mean, the location of the primary data center is in a spot where there's a Microsoft data center, a Google data center, an Amazon data center. I mean, Apple's there. There's a bunch of places right in this spot because they don't get hit by this kind of stuff. And then everybody got hit with this, and so everybody's redundancies are falling one by one, and it's just there's not a whole lot you can do in that. You can't really plan for everything falling and then additional redundancies having some problems. So yeah, I was boots on the ground, actually physically going and getting things back up and running.
How long was it down for?
6 or 7 hours, I think it was total.
I mean, that's pretty good considering, I mean, your office is outside. You don't even have a roof over your head.
Yeah, pretty much. No, it worked out okay. The biggest issue was actually getting over there. I had to physically go over to the data center and make some changes to make sure everything got back up and running with redundancy that didn't even exist yet. We had to kind of put some new things in place. But with that, like physically getting around, I mean, to get from basically where I'm at to the data center, I physically had to get out of my car with a chainsaw, move like 5 trees. It was a day.
Proof of work.
Yeah, no joke.
2 days before launching DATUM.
Exactly. So it was the perfect timing. And
was that like, were you, the DATUM launch it was always planned for when you launched it? It wasn't like, oh, we went down, we might as well hit them with a new launch at the same time?
No, that was planned for that. I was actually supposed to be there also, and that didn't work out. So,
well, we can talk about DATUM in a second. I mean, Luke, do you have anything to add here? I think you're still with us. Luke is audio only, by the way, guys, because he has a very secure setup over there. So, we're just.
I don't have anything to add, no.
I'm curious. Like, I mean, Eligius was, however the hell you pronounce it, was, it was a heavyweight pool, right? And I think, you were. Mark said one of the first. I thought you were the actual first public pool. But I mean, you guys know the history better than me. But regardless, it was like a very heavyweight pool. Right now, I mean, I think people have really high expectations for Ocean, especially coming out of launch. And I'm really curious, just like how you guys are thinking about. At the end of the day, right? It comes down to growing hash and what, like Bitmain and his proxies. Control probably like 400x the amount of hash that you guys have so far, something like that. I mean, I'm not a mathematician. Like, how are any of you guys thinking about it? I mean, I'll just open that up. I don't know who wants to answer, but it's got to be the thing that's on top of everyone's mind.
Yeah, naturally getting more hash rate. Like I said, there's only so many pools you can have,
Right.
which implies there's just a bare minimum to be viable, right? And I mean, that shakes out both ways. Naively, the FPPS payout model that has become dominant, which is a super high time preference option that miners have gone for, where you get paid no matter what, and you sort of tell yourself the sweet lie that is somehow a fair split of what comes out of the blockchain. Of course, it isn't. And when we launched Ocean, we were like, guys, this is super high time preference. Like, if someone's guaranteeing to pay you sats no matter what happens in the blockchain, they're going to take an enormous cut for that. They just have to, because they have to deal with the randomness instead of you. Right. So Ocean, with the low time preference approach that says, look, if you want to deal with the randomness of the blockchain, it's a lot more volatile, but you'll make a lot more money overall. Where do we see that, in Bitcoin otherwise, right? You deal with years of bear markets and then you have an unbelievable bull market. It's exactly the same thing. If you can stomach that kind of volatility, then you can make a lot more money. If you can't, and you want someone to come and clean it up and make it all pretty for you, then that's not going to be Bitcoin anymore. That's just going to be fiat again. Predictability is just the essence of fiat, right? It just always kind of sucks. It just sucks enough that people will tolerate it and we all boil as frogs. So to that end, the fact that we have the payout system we do, unfortunately, it's exacerbated. The smaller we are as a pool, the more variance, or the longer it can drag out for before we resolve to 100% luck. So Ocean is sitting there a couple of exahash now, which is good. The first exahash was the hardest, of course. The second exahash was a lot easier. And with what we're rolling out at the moment, we've actually seen a lot of organic growth. And, I think around 3, 4, 5, it starts to become that the variance is tolerable for 99% of miners, and they can just focus on revenue at that point and go, yeah, I mined with Ocean for, 5 weeks, and it was enough for me to do my comparison with another pool. I earned, 11% more or something. These are the kind of numbers we've had thrown at us by miners. But the bigger our hash rate, the faster they can do the maths and do the comparison. So yeah, that is based that since launch, since before launch, that's been our primary concern. The more hash rate we have, the better a product we can offer. Because if we're finding 1 block a week, that sucks for miners. If we're finding 3 blocks a day, that's fine. Then they can have a viable operation and pay their utility bills without sweating it.
Yeah, I mean, that's the brutal part about the mining pool business, particularly launching or relaunching a pool or launching a pool, whatever you want to say, in terms of this pool launch. I mean, I think so. When just to the listeners, when mechanics is variance, in practical terms, what that means is just how often the pool finds a block, so how often you get paid, right? And obviously, people have rent costs, labor costs, hardware costs. They have things they need to pay, and humans don't like waiting to get paid. So that variance figure is, and then also you have ASICs that go out. They lose their competitive advantage over time as new ASICs enter the market. So you want to get paid quicker, and it's kind of like success begets success, and it becomes hard to bootstrap. On the opposite side, on the flip side of that, is we saw Foundry launch. Maybe 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and they like quickly became the largest pool. Now they had something up their sleeve, which is that they KYC all their miners and they provided loans to their miners, and the suits really liked it. Like the suits thought KYC was a feature, so they had like kind of like a unique competitive advantage. And I actually think there's kind of some similarities with you guys that you are very unique in the pool space. So once you get your stride, maybe we start to see momentum really build there. So I would say, from my perspective, I'm looking at it like you guys have two key things that you're focusing on. You're focusing on educating miners, right? That this FPPS model, where they're basically outsourcing block construction and risk to like the central bank of Jihan, who is financing all of it, is incredibly high risk for the golden goose that is Bitcoin. So you have the education side, which like Mechanic is focused on. And then you have like the tooling side, like making the pool competitively unique in the pool landscape. And it seems like that's where Jason's major focus is. And that's what's so important about this DATUM launch. So, I mean, Jason, do you want to explain? I mean, you're the one who built it, I believe, right? You want to explain what the hell DATUM is and why people should care?
So, I mean, normally when you connect to a pool, the pool gives you the work. The pool is the one that's running the Bitcoin node, and the pool is the one that's constructing the work that your miner's going to try to find hashes for. DATUM shifts that, so where the pool is no longer giving you work. In fact, the pool gives you basically nothing except for how to split the rewards. And you are running the node, you are making the block, and when you find it, you submit it to the network. The only thing that Ocean's coordinating is the payout split. So we're keeping track of how much work you do. We're making sure it is doing work for the pool and for the rest of the miners, including yourself. And that's pretty much it. So you are actually the miner again. And this is kind of taking you back to it is solo mining. You are solo mining with DATUM. So the pool's role is greatly diminished in that we no longer have control over what is actually going into the block. That's all you as the miner. Hopefully that answers your question.
So, I mean, yeah, it's like solo mining from the position of you construct your blocks yourself.
Yeah, I mean that is solo mining.
And then it's pool mining from the point of you don't have to deal with the variance of just being a small miner. You get to
exactly
share the work with others. So this is something absolutely massive, right? This is the dream, right? This is what we want to see. Essentially, within a pool, there's almost like all these mini pools, or I don't know, solo miners, I guess. It doesn't matter. It's
They're
like a
solo miners.
metaphor. And you kind of distribute that censorship risk. Maybe some miners are censoring certain transactions. Maybe some are censoring different transactions. But usually, a transaction will get through regardless. There'll be some subset that isn't. And at the end of the day, the miners get to have total control over what they want to construct. Now,
Exactly.
this is a dream that um, a bunch of people have been working on like the Stratum V2 side, and as part of your launch, there was a lot of back and forth there about Stratum V2 versus Datum, and why not do Stratum V2? Like, how do you guys think about that? Like, why did you, like, Jason? Why did you just like build up? I mean, anyone can answer this, but why did you guys create a whole new setup instead of using Stratum V2?
I mean, I can take it, or mechanics kind of been in the weeds on it more than I have. It's a
Yeah. I look at it as it's not really that much of a technical question, right? And if you approach it that way, it's kind of misleading. Like there are multiple tools that do similar jobs in every domain, right? It's just ultimately it comes down to people and what they want to do and what they want to use things for. So there have been SV2 pools already, and do they do anything for decentralization of template construction? No. Does that mean SV2 isn't capable of that? No, of course not. It actually is capable of decentralizing templates. But I mean, look at a pool like Brains, right? It's an SV2 pool. They have SV2 firmware that you can use it for. But SV2 does a lot of things. It doesn't just decentralize templates. It also allows encrypted and more efficient communication between the pool and the miner. It's an upgrade to centralized templates, and that's all it's getting used for. And it gets worse because Brains is one of the most egregious ant pool proxies out there. Their
Right.
blocks are full of ant pools, accelerated transactions, and they switched to FPPS, which comes with its, that's its Faustian bargain of its own. If you're that small as a pool, being able to maintain the kind of money you need to be able to pay out to miners during periods of bad luck basically means you've got to turn to a parent company to come and bail you out. And you already said, it's conjecture, but it's probably just Bitmain bankrolling all of the smaller pools, and that's why you see them all having the same Stratum work, and you see them all using the same custodian. So rather than be congruent with what we want to do with decentralizing templates, their SV2 use is entirely a virtue signal, and it's presenting the network as being more decentralized than it actually is. So that's a false sense of security. It's the exact opposite of what we want to do. Does it make SV2 bad or anything? No, it doesn't. But I maintain that having a tool that does one thing and does it well is much better than having a tool that can do a whole bunch of things. And because it theoretically can do something but never does, it remains this sort of naively superior solution. But if it never gets used that way, it's not going to help anything. So it really comes down to the willingness of people in Ocean to push for a thing, right? That's why we've incentivized it, saying if you're making your own blocks, you get cheaper fees on Ocean than if you don't. We want to push you to do this for the health of Bitcoin. If a pool isn't willing to do that, it doesn't matter whether a protocol exists or not. And it's not because, and this was possible before without Datum, but no one had any initiative to do it. The fact that we do, and the fact that we made a protocol specifically to do it, speaks to exactly the way we think it should be done, right? And SV2 is just not quite the right tool for the job. And some people took that as like, oh, I'm curious why you didn't use SV2. I've been working on it for years. What's up? Other people took it as in like, how dare you not use SV2? You have to use it, and got very offended by it. I mean, that's pretty ridiculous in my estimation. I have said incorrect things about it before due to my own misunderstanding, but I've definitely corrected those and don't wish to imply that it's not capable of miners creating templates themselves. It's more just looking at the social aspects and maybe even the political aspects of Bitcoin, and the fact that pools, for the most part, don't really want to give up template construction. They like it because it gives them a lot of control that they're happy not ceding over to the miners in a way that they just don't care about the fact that Bitcoin can't last like that. It can't last with less than 100 people at best deciding what gets into the chain. So and it's not just that, right? Because Datum is solo mining software. First and foremost, that's what it does. You can use it to connect to an upstream pool that has DATUM on the pool side that can verify everything you do and give you Coinbase splits if you request it. But if you don't want to do that, this is just solo mining software. And it's been forever since like anyone solo mining for years has just, they usually use these things called solo pools, which are someone running a third party Stratum server for you, running a node, constructing the templates on your behalf, undoing all of the sovereign aspects of solo mining, but giving you 98% of the reward split. And people have been calling this solo mining, and it just isn't. So I think it's good to try and redefine a few of these terms. Like in our estimation, Datum is for solo mining. It can be solo mining where you split rewards with other people, or it can be solo mining where you literally just interact with the Bitcoin network permissionlessly without anyone having any sort of intermediation between you and the network. That's sovereign, true solo mining, and there really aren't many people doing that.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, I think you're mostly referring to like solo CK pool, which is like effectively, yeah, they're constructing the blocks for you. It's not really solo mining.
You need their permission. At the end of the day, if you find a block,
Yeah.
you've got to ask them, hey, can you tell the network about this block? That's not sovereign. Like with Datum, if you're mining, even using ocean splits, if you're using Datum, when you find a block, your Datum server tells your node about it, which tells the network about it. You don't need to ask
So
ocean.
when you're using Datum, okay, but let's pull it back real quick. So what appeals to me about your strategy, since very early on, is just the idea of like simple, robust solutions, right? That's what appeals to me about Bitcoin. Like a lot of people are like a lot of pre-coiners or Bitcoin deniers or whatever. They're like, Bitcoin's too complicated. Like the reason I'm attracted to Bitcoin is because it's actually incredibly simple and robust. It doesn't try and do all the things, right? It's also why I've been so focused on Nostr lately. It's just because I feel it's a simple, robust solution to a problem that a lot of us have. And with Datum, well, even pre-Datum, right? So you had this idea that I think you're the only pool that like shows the block template that miners are mining pre-Datum on the website. Like, look, here's what the next block would look like if we find a block. And then you went a step further and you were like, okay, we're actually going to provide multiple templates. And instead of doing anything like really fancy, it's like you're just putting a different stratum endpoint into your miner, and then you're mining that template. It's super simple. It's like very simple, but that's the appeal to it, right?
Yeah.
And then with Datum, from my viewpoint, the idea was we want to solve really one main problem, which is who constructs the blocks, and let's try and do it in the simplest way possible, and bring that back to who's ever actually mining, who's ever actually running the miners. So, I mean, I've spoken to you guys previously. Like one of the key aspects of Datum is how lightweight it is, and that you can just easily run it on commodity hardware. So, do you want to talk about that briefly?
Jason should take that
Yeah,
one.
I'll jump in on that one. So, I mean, the Datum's written in C, and it was kind of designed from the beginning to be as efficient as possible. So, like one of my test cases, I would run it on a Pi 4 and throw 10,000 synthetic miners at it to see how it would go, and it does fine. So there's that kind of stuff. So you can have reasonably spec'd hardware. You don't need anything too crazy to be able to run Datum. Actually, the heaviest load is the Bitcoin node,
Right.
because the Bitcoin node itself has to validate blocks from the network, take transactions into the mempool, keep the mempool, validate all that, etc. That's the heaviest part. The actual mining part, some of our beta testers and alpha testers have been pretty surprised. They look at it like, oh, this is using 3% of one core with 8,000 workers connected. I mean, it's light. It's pretty light. So it doesn't take a lot of effort to like on the hardware side, there's not a lot of effort. And the setup of it is pretty simple as well. If you can set up a Bitcoin node, you basically just have to add a few configuration options to the node itself and then run Datum alongside it. It's as low friction as possible to get you from mining with the centralized templates and that we make, that another pool makes, to actually mining your own template with your own node. And I don't think we could make it much simpler than it is, although I think like Mechanic with Start9 was trying to do a package for it to make it even easier, but it's pretty simple. And I think that's an important thing, because then we can move away from solo pools and things. If you want a solo mine, we'll just use DATUM and mine either with split rewards from motion or get 100% of the reward when you find your own block. Like no middleman, no nothing. So we'll get away from some of this stuff and kind of get people back to the network where they were 10 plus years ago.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the most productive path for this conversation going forward is, I think we all agree that the ultimate goal is to have miners construct their own blocks. And if that happens at scale via Stratum V2, that would be fantastic. And if that happens at scale through Datum, that would be fantastic. And let's just focus on Datum rather than the comparisons, because also have not as much knowledge about Stratum V2 as I probably should to like properly have that conversation. I don't know how much knowledge of it you guys have, but with all that said, so Mechanic, like you package this thing up for Start9, right? So like I could have 4 ASICs, just like be like a really small, humble home miner. I could have 4 ASICs or like a couple bit axes or something like that. And I could just run this on my Start9 box with Bitcoin Knots connected to it, because Knots is basically what's powering a lot of the configuration and stuff like that as well. And then I'm good to go. That's it.
Yeah, I'll get into the weeds a bit. So Start9 servers like to do everything by Tor or by MDNS. So everything's got dot locals at the end of it. And you can't put a dot local into your Antminer. It doesn't know how to use that. You need an IP and a port. So there's one little hack you have to do on the current version of StartOS. That's 3 lines pasted into terminal, and that's it. Then you'll be able to access your Start9 server's DATUM service over your local area network. It's really, really simple. Accessing it over, like if you have a hosted miner and you want to point that at your Start9 server, that gets a bit more complicated. But if you want to do stuff like that, there's probably other easier ways for it. But yeah, if you have like an old Raspberry Pi 4 version of StartOS running 0351, which is the latest version, I dare say you could have 1,000 miners pointed to it and it wouldn't even break a sweat. So if you have a garage with 1,000 bit axes in it, you're fine. Go for it.
Yeah, I think your biggest thing would be like block validation time with the node. I mean, the Pi 4 does take a little bit of time to validate blocks now, but
yeah, I mean, fuck a
is.
Pi. Don't use a Pi, but like if it was like $125 like old Intel machine or some shit.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's
more than good.
The fact that it can do it on a Pi 4 is just kind of the benchmark. If you can go that low, then anything else you can just reasonably acquire is within reach, and I think that's important. And I don't see that with any other solutions that are like potentially out there. It's just one of those things that's not much is designed to be lightweight anymore, and I don't know why, but that's one of the things I like to do. I like to code things to the metal, make sure it's as efficient as possible. If we have a task to do, that's all it should do. It shouldn't have 4,000 extra libraries and 4,000 steps that you got to do and all these other things that have to happen in order for it to work. It should just do what it's supposed to do.
Last binary you sent me was 240 kilobytes, right?
Yep. Yeah, it's not big.
It's tiny. It's all written in C, and maybe I'm not supposed to say, but it contains a totally unrolled SHA-256 just to get rid of one dependency. So
not anymore.
We actually changed that. but yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's just designed to be efficient, and that's part of it. So in that, it's the protocol's encrypted. It's binary protocol, so we're not sending just plain text JSON over the internet anymore, and doubling the amount of data that we have to do versus Stratum V1. And it's just does all of that in a more effective way.
So
and it
it's
can use SV2 as well for the communications between the DATUM server
Right.
and miners. It can use SV2 for that if and when Bitmain and WhatsMiner will release SV2 firmware, and it's not just a couple of aftermarket firmware like Brains that allow it. We can still use that, and it was
between the miners and the datum server.
DATUM can use SV1 or
Right.
SV2.
But right now,
Yeah.
between datum and like Ocean servers, or if another pool adopted it, who knows? But between datum and Ocean servers, that connection's encrypted.
Right. That's so the datum protocol itself is encrypted between we call it the datum gateway, and the pool. So, and then between your miners and the gateway, that's currently still SV1 because everything supports SV1.
Right. So that solves the man in the middle concern, unless they're in your local network.
Yeah, and if they're in your network, you're in trouble anyway.
You're
So,
probably really fucked. Yeah. Okay. So that's huge. Okay. So it's not just, it doesn't just solve the block construction part. I mean, people have always been concerned that people would sit in between malicious actors, including potentially ISPs, could sit in between the pool and the miners and basically try and steal money.
right. Yeah, and one of the big considerations with datum was the encryption. It just had to happen. There was no reason not to do it, and to also make it a protocol that wasn't, forgetting the term off the top of my head, but basically, if you do manage to man in the middle it, the amount of information you can glean from the connection or from logging it is not enough to know exactly what's going on, just by other aspects of how things are happening. So there was a lot there to try to make sure that this is as secure as it could possibly be for what it's doing.
Badass. Okay, so I mean, then the other concern is the other thing when it comes down to individual miners constructing their blocks, is if I'm a miner and I'm constructing my blocks and I'm trying to do it, everyone says like good faith actor, bad faith actor. Usually it's like some kind of blend in between. Like one man's good faith actor might be another man's bad faith actor. But at the end of the day, like you're almost in partnership with other people that are participating in your pool. And one of the concerns is that what if I have a malicious actor that is mining with the pool and is intentionally trying to disrupt operations at the pool and make it so it's less profitable for other people mining at the pool. And one example you could point to is a competing pool. Let's say, let's just use Jihan as our main bad guy at Bitmain. Like Bitmain is trying to disrupt operations at Ocean by intentionally either like block withholding or like mining unprofitable blocks or less profitable blocks. Like how does Datum handle that edge case?
So I mean, the pool itself, I mean, you have to keep in mind that you are in a pool, and the pool's duty is to make sure that we're lowering variance for the miners and ensuring they get a fair split of rewards. So in order to do that, we have to do some, I don't know what term to use for it, but basically to ensure everybody's doing what they're supposed to do. And the goal behind the algorithm for the Datum backend is if you were to solo mine whatever you are mining, that is the reward you will get over time. So if you want to mine a block that just doesn't have anything of value in it anymore, like you're just doing all out of band, zero fee transactions, well, you can
Right.
do it, but you're not getting the same reward as somebody else on the pool that's going to be mining like what we would consider a normal block, I guess. So if the entire pool is mining blocks of X Bitcoin and you're mining blocks of 90% of that, well, you're going to get 90% of the reward. The actual algorithm and how that works isn't completely publicly fleshed out, and I don't know how much I can speak to it, but basically we have to protect the miners from attacks like that, and we have to do it in a way where we're not making the decision for what can be in your block. So we're not going to tell you no, you can't do this, but we have to tell you that no, you can't lose this other miner money. So if you want to do a block that's however you want to construct it, if you want to make empty blocks, I mean, I think that's silly, but we're not going to stop you from doing it. You're just not going to make as much money doing it as you would mining blocks with transactions in them.
Like
that
the
make
next
sense?
block, and the block after that, your proportion is paid less than it would otherwise be paid.
So it has to be based on something that's not determined by us, and
Got it.
that the only way to do that is to make it determined by the entirety of the pool. So if the entirety of the pool will set the baseline across the whole share log, and that's the baseline. If
So it's like a
everybody's mining,
median or something.
kind of, like I said, I don't know how much we've gotten into this publicly as of yet,
Okay.
but yeah, I mean, the short of it is, we're not going to let some malicious actor screw over the rest of the pool, and we're also not going to let somebody who like just is doing things that just aren't profitable for the rest of the pool make everybody else lose money. The other miners can't subsidize your behavior, whether it's good or bad. Like somebody else isn't required to subsidize that.
I mean, to me, this is like the most incredibly important aspect,
Yeah,
right? Because a pool like Foundry can solve it by just KYCing everybody,
Hmm.
which is obviously, to me, not a
right.
solution, and obviously, definitely not a long-term solution. You don't want the majority of miners KYC'd. And, you know, to me, like the idea that, like, let's use Foundry again as an example, which, by the way, like, I'm not trying to shit on them too much because it's like the single best thing Barry Silber's ever done. There's some good people at Foundry, and it's like one of the last things that's like holding back Bitmain right now while we try and figure our shit out.
Agreed.
So thank you to the KYC suits over there. But like Foundry, you can't even permissionlessly join their pool, right? Like you can't go and find a Stratum endpoint and join their pool. Like you have to have like a coffee meeting with them or something. Like I don't know how you go about joining that pool. But if
Right.
you have a pool that is people can permissionlessly join and they can construct their own blocks, then this becomes a significant issue. And one of the things with Bitcoin is the beauty of Bitcoin is you don't have to assume good faith. Like in fact, it's the opposite. Like you can assume everyone's a greedy actor, and the system is more robust for it. So like if we want a system that's actually going to work at scale and is going to attract serious hash rate, it can't be based on that assumption. So I mean, I think on the surface, whatever you guys have cooked up here, like makes a lot of sense to me. It seems very clever. I wonder, like, do you guys have a plan? Is it going to be transparent on how that calculation works? The
Yeah,
concept
that
in
is the
general
plan.
makes sense.
That is the
Yeah.
plan. We're still doing a private exclusive beta at the moment. So, I mean, a lot of the stuff isn't public, including the code. We plan on having that all out by the 18th. So there'll be a lot more questions answered in detail there. But the main thing is that, again, like another miner, like I as miner A can't subsidize the behavior of miner B, be it them a good or bad actor. What they may think what they're doing is a good thing. Luke
Yeah, I mean,
famously likes.
an example you would have that's not necessarily quote unquote bad actor, but would, you know, absolutely suck if I was part of the pool with them and be like a race to zero, is if a miner in a high fee environment was literally just solely taking out of band transaction fee accelerations and just not sharing it with everybody else,
Right.
would be one of the examples here. And then you kind of create a tragedy of the commons where it's like everyone's incentivized to have like these black market transaction fee acceleration situations because no one else in the pool is sharing with them. So they're all like hiding it and
Well,
taking
you
it
have
and
you have to
really
think,
want
like you said, it is permissionless and
Right.
it is non-custodial. So at the end of the day, we can't stop somebody from doing that, but we can stop it from hurting somebody else's bottom line.
Right.
That's the only thing that we can do as the ones that are calculating the reward split.
Yeah, and
And that's,
the
yeah,
onus is on us to do that. If we
Yeah.
don't,
exactly.
You just won't get the hash.
well, I
Is that
mean,
what you mean?
we can't make life horrible for miners on the pool, and it is a sort of, yeah, if you want to be a part of the club, then you have to abide by the rules of the club, and if you don't like the rules of the club, you can leave the club. It's not, I'm sure some people are going to paint it in the most negative light possible, but at the end of
Yeah.
the day, man, like we can't. It's permissionless, and permissionless, like anything that's permissionless, is open to abuse. So it's on someone to try and make the abuse as minimal enough that everyone else can have a nice time. So same
Yeah.
with Nostr, right? Nostr's permissionless and it's censorship resistant. And then you get these reply guys spam things everywhere, just making it a miserable experience for everyone.
Yeah.
And Will and all the people working on Nostra aren't being silly about it. They're like, let's figure out a way to deal with this. Otherwise, Nostra's going to suck.
Right.
So, but if you have, in theory, you could have a centralized social network that had a way to get rid of all the spam. Somehow
Yeah,
they can't even
it's
do
like
it.
it's
They're
the Foundry model. It's KYC. I mean, you could get rid of. You could take blood tests of everyone who posts, and
Right.
then ban them, and then you never have spam.
Right, and how horrible a solution is that? Because it doesn't even work anyway. Like Elon, Twitter is completely centralized, and there's still spam everywhere. You even see like blue checkmark spam. Like so KYC isn't really a real solution, but I mean, maybe that's
Band-Aid.
because of the financial incentives. They like inflating the number of accounts they have and stuff. I'm sure with centralization of a social network, you could minimize spam. But if you want to decentralize it and make it permissionless, it's hard to get those protocols resistant to abuse.
Yeah, so you make a strong incentive. So, I mean, Jason, real quick, like, did you just hit me with it'll be open source in 2 weeks?
Give or take. Yeah, pretty much.
Well, that's 11 days. Let's
it's
say
11 days, less than
1
2
believes
weeks.
2 weeks.
Well, I gave him 3 days. I gave him an additional 3 days.
But yeah, that is the goal. But yeah, I mean, one of the things that people like just completely gloss over, there's a huge difference between a pool that will KYC or any entity like that does that, and something that's permissionless. Because let's say you're a miner and you're mining to address ABC, and for some reason you do something you're not supposed to, and we want to stop you from doing that. Well, okay, we can let's say we had the ability to do that, which we really don't. You could just change addresses or change IP. We don't know who you are. We have none of that information. So we are truly permissionless. We can't stop that. And so because we can't, the guardrails have to be in place to make it so that the pool as a whole is useful for everyone. And there's a lot of different ways we kind of spitballed on how to do that. And the consensus kind of was we can't base like that on, like, let's say we had like a baseline template, like everything was judged by what we thought was the template. We can't do that, because then we're the arbiter again.
Yeah.
And because of that, we had to come up with a way where the miners are the arbiters, and they're the ones determining what everyone's going to make. And that way, so when the ultimate goal is, so if you mine, and you mine with DATUM, and you solo mine with Ocean, then whatever you are mining is what you would earn in the long term. So if you're able to mine a block a year, that would earn you 3.2 Bitcoin, let's say. Well, in a year, you should earn 3.2 Bitcoin.
Well, actually, maybe even more, because you'd have better variance.
Well, no, the variance doesn't necessarily
that.
change your reward. The variance
Well, it
gets you
does if hash
there.
rate spikes.
Right. It gets you there a little more smoothly.
It definitely has some resolution.
Right. So, but that way, like, assuming 100% luck and you mine your block in a year, like, that's what you would still get by mining your block with Ocean. That's the goal. So if you want to mine an empty block, you're going to get an empty block worth of rewards at the end of the year.
It's clever. It's a smart solution. It's a smart, I mean, I guess mitigation. It was one of those unsolved problems that it was like, there's so many things like that with Bitcoin where people are like, oh yeah, well, we're just going to send block construction to the individual miners or whatever. It's like, yeah, I just kind of feel like you're hand waving it away. And like, that's just not going to work because people take out of band fees. And this to me is a very pragmatic, clever, simple mitigation to that. And I like it a lot. Yeah. So you guys keep saying permissionless. Am I correct that the individual miners are broadcasting their blocks when they find it? Or do you guys ultimately choose, like, we don't like that block. You construct it. We don't like you. We don't like that block. You can't.
We can't stop them.
Heck no. When you find a block, we want you to tell the network about it. We don't want to add another hop and slow things down, because, it's a 10-minute race, man. I don't want a 2-second delay. And it's it wouldn't be solo mining if you weren't telling the network around the blocks you found. You need to tell the network directly. But there is configuration options in DATUM for you to add extra, places to send it, just because you want to blast that block out as far and wide as it will go the minute you find it, just in case there's a competing block that gets found 20 milliseconds later. You want your block to be known around. The pool wants that. Everyone wants that.
That's awesome. I
Yeah.
like
So
that.
I mean, in short, we can't stop you from broadcasting your block.
So you become more of just like kind of a coordination server. You're just kind of
Exactly.
And there's plans for us to disintermediate further, but that's not going to be DATUM's first launch. But
right.
basically, the dream is P2Pool. Every miner does everything, and there's no central point of failure. Ocean's still doing a little bit because we're coordinating the rewards, but we have a way to, the plan is to minimize that even further. But I mean, I don't know how much we should get into that now. It's quite a way off.
Yeah, I mean, let's stick with the things we got now, or at least in 2 weeks. The the so I mean, mechanic. Me and you have, and I mean, I think Luke is still on the call. Yeah, Luke's still on the call. Since Luke hasn't chimed in, it's important to realize that everything we've said up until this point, Luke strongly endorses everything we've said because he hasn't spoken. Okay, it's an endorsement.
2 weeks.
What was that?
In 2 weeks.
In 2 weeks.
I think it's important to point out that people are using this today. It's not something that is like that doesn't exist and we're just saying it'll be out. There's people that are using it, and they found blocks with it already.
Yeah, we've had blocks show up on Mempool space
That's
that say the name of the miner that made it. Right.
That's cool. I like that little piece because social signal is important. It's cool that it shows who found the block. That's basically the only, besides picking which transactions are in the block, and maybe you're picking some that are your own transactions or something. Like that's the main That's like the main bonus of you finding it rather than someone else finding it, right?
Well, importantly, it's not just who found the block, who actually designed and created the block.
Right.
So
who built the template?
Right. Yeah. There's a difference between you as the miner in a pool that found the block, which is cool. Don't get me wrong, but if you didn't make it, I mean, you are not the miner. Like that's just the line. There is a line there.
So anyway, where I was going with this was mechanic. Me and you have I think we both care about Bitcoin a lot. I mean, I will say personally that I have a lot of respect for you. And we both have very strong opinions about things, which I think people should have strong opinions. Like, it's just like a waste of time if you don't have strong opinions. And we've been a little bit kind of on the same side on the bullshit ordinals, inscriptions, spams stuff. That we both think it's more or less a scam, and it's fleecing retail, and people are buying things that are worthless. But where we've differed, and that is trending to zero, like long term, like none of this shit will have any kind of value, and we'll like look back on it in a few years, and people will just be like, "What the fuck was that? Like, why were retards even doing that in the first place?" Like ICOs and stuff like that. And we're kind of already seeing it. I don't want to do the jinx thing where I say that and then like Udi just like launches a bunch of shit on chain, because I feel like that's what always happens when people say that, like, oh, we're done with it now, and then it just happens. But where we've differed is like how we respond to that situation, right? And I've been more of like a transaction fee maximalist, like, oh, they're just going to spend a shit ton of money and then they'll run out of money. And you've been on the side of, because you can correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but you've been more on the side of, oh, well, like there's like real things that we can do today to stop the effect on UTXO bloat and stop it from happening, whether it's nodes not relaying transactions or whether it's Ocean not having a template that includes them in the first place. Was my synopsis relatively good before I continue?
Yeah, sure. I don't disagree with what you're saying.
Awesome. And so am I right though that in this situation, like if this shit continues or whatever, like Ocean could be like the best pool to mine inscriptions on? And like, are you guys cool with that? Is that like
Well, yeah, we've said that unequivocally, right? It's the deep principle is that miners should be able to put what they want in blocks, and we don't.
At the same time, miners shouldn't put that garbage in the block. It's also true.
I'm not sure people are making you out. You kind of sound a little muffled.
I have no idea what you said.
I do believe, and Luke, correct me if I'm wrong, you said that people shouldn't be putting that stuff in their
Yeah.
blocks.
You shouldn't do
Right.
it, but
But that's a different question, right?
yeah, it's a free speech thing, man. If I don't care about speech I hate, then I'm not into free speech, right? Like
Right.
you have to be able to do it. We want miners to be able to do it. There was also that like happy irony I like to sort of pontificate on, where if these things all get branded as unregistered securities and suddenly the centralized pools can't mine them and the only way to do it is ocean, that would just be the kind of irony that happens, right? Given that we were the pool against it. And I would just find that funny.
That's what I'm saying.
That's
Like
not
it could be the pool.
Yeah, for sure. I think because people just look at it comes down as a retort, and this is a bit of tangential to the spam conversation, but one of the critiques of Ocean was, and it's the last topic, which was, if Mara can go out there and get like the world's best fees for its block space and, take out of band transaction fees to guarantee that you get in the blockchain in 6 hours or whatever, or give you 99% of a guarantee because they have enough hash rate, then people are like, well, they're always going to have the most fees in their blocks, and Ocean with a decentralized model can never compete with that. And I'm like, yeah, that's true. It's just there's a flip side to that argument, which is centralized template constructors also have to comply with regulations. Decentralized ones don't. So in some circumstances, decentralization is more lucrative. In other circumstances, centralization is more lucrative. It's not always just better to be centralized until you get shut down or regulated. That's not the case, right? So that was kind of my point with that. I want to see block space get kind of weird. That would be healthy Bitcoin to me, where what's in blocks just is kind of strange and unpredictable. Because right now, like, you have this perspective out there. Most people refer to the mempool as the mempool, implying that there is like a cohesive vision around what's going in the next block. That's how mempool space present it. Everyone talks about the mempool. And of course, if you had such a thing as the mempool, you wouldn't need a blockchain, right? That implies that we have a complete congruent universal agreement around what there is and the order in which it was created. That's not true. Everyone's mempool is different. And your mempool is a reflection of ultimately what you'd like to see in the chain. So coming back to the spam, the disagreement around spam that you and I have, one of my contentions is that as a node, you have absolutely no incentive to relay JPEGs around. You're not interested in storing them. They're unspendable UTXOs. They make IBD worse for everyone. And no one is paying you to relay it at the end of the day. Miners, maybe they have, 8 cents worth of incentive to put it in a block, sure. But as a node, I have absolutely no interest. So I run
You have one incentive.
What's that?
If you don't want Wiz to dictate what your transaction fee estimation is.
Well, mempool space uses that's exactly it, right?
Not really, no.
Well, mempool uses the fee estimation approach of there is one mempool, and we will use that to estimate whether you're getting in the next block or not. But that's not how Bitcoin software actually usually does it. It looks backwards and says, here's what the average things have been in blocks. Because one approach is robust and in the future. Like if everyone is solo mining and putting weird stuff in the chain, you don't look at your mempool and go, all right, here's how much I got to pay. If your mempool has nothing to do with what other miners are putting into the chain, and the latter approach implies that we have decentralization, the former doesn't, and it's a concern. If there is like I say, if there is the mempool and you can predict what is in the next block with near 100% certainty, that implies that everything has become completely centralized. That's
it's always a guess. It's always, it's an estimation. You're making an estimate, right? And I mean, I would go up further than what you said. I would say like long term, decentralized block construction or distributed block construction, whatever term you want to use, is going to be way more profitable than like centralized suit miners or suit pools or whatever, that have a central point of failure and have like all this bureaucracy that's attached to it, because we will have a wide variety of transactions, and there will be a lot of transactions that they're just straight up not allowed to mine. But in the meantime, if we were in a situation where, I don't know the exact number, but it felt like we were at like 70%, 80% of transactions that were being included in blocks was bullshit transactions, And if you weren't seeing those bullshit transactions, you had, you basically had to trust a third party to have any kind of insight there if you weren't running a node that was seeing them.
Well, not really, because I mean, you're looking at the blocks that have been found, right? You're not looking at what's in any kind of mempool. Like, really, that is how Bitcoin Core and Bitcoin Knots do fee estimation. They don't look at the mempool. They look at what was the last block.
Right, but Mempool Space looks at the Mempool open source project. Like if you're running that on your Start9 or whatever, is looking at your mempool.
Right.
The thing about it is you have to keep in mind the only reason they're able to do that with any reasonable amount of certainty is because every miner is running Bitcoin Core with default settings.
Right.
That's basically centralization. And so they can predict with pretty good accuracy what's going to end up in the chain because everybody's doing the exact same thing.
Until a Mara pool block comes along. And
exactly.
Yeah. And that throws everything off, including all the FPPS rates. And we go, oh, well, let's pretend that isn't happening. Right. So it's not a robust way for fee estimation to work. The Bitcoin, and it doesn't even, you have to deal with things like witness discounts. And I think, who was it that was getting into this? It was AJ Towns, I think. That was like, no, there's a reason, like, mature adult version of fee estimation looks at what's been happening in the blockchain. It doesn't look at some sort of pretend mempool that's supposed to represent everyone else's mempool and be certainly what every miner will include in the next block, because you have no guarantees of any of that. It's all unknown. You can only go off the blockchain, which is like driving, looking in the rear view mirror. Fair enough. It's kind of ridiculous, but it's what's in the rear view mirror is agreed upon by everyone. What's in front of you is just a perspective.
Right. There's no global mempool. There's no global state. There's a global state once blocks get confirmed. Or
Exactly.
I mean, if you talk to
it was a global mempool,
a number of blocks are confirmed. Right. That's the innovation.
Yeah, for sure it is, man. That is literally the Byzantine general's problem. Is like if we could agree on a mempool, then we would both know to attack the city at 2 p.m. and neither of us would die, right? You know the whole fable or whatever you call it, the thought experiment. But yeah, I mean, I just want to address some of the other things you said as well. It's probably good to do so. Getting sucked into the whole spam thing as Ocean was very, very stressful and ironic, given that we wanted to make it miner's choice rather than anyone else. But looking back on it, I certainly learned a lot. And at the time, I had a kind of knee-jerk perspective on it. But over time, I sort of realized, actually, I was a lot more correct than I initially realized. And I wasn't really making very good arguments at the beginning of it. And over time, I began to realize how Bitcoin actually worked. And now when people are telling me that they have an ideological difference with me based on how I feel we should treat arbitrary data and how they feel it should be treated, invariably, they're always running Bitcoin Core with default settings, which literally just says, a transaction could be any size as long as it can fit inside the max block size limit, right? It can't be 5 megabytes, but it could be any other size. It can fit as long as it fits in the block. But if your arbitrary data, I'm setting you to 83 bytes as a limit. We've done that forever. We've always treated arbitrary data as different from financial activity, and no one ever had a problem with it or characterized it as censorship. It was always like, oh, if you want to do that, you got to use op return. And if you're using op return, you're only allowed 83 bytes. You can't put like a whole JPEG in an op return. Yeah. You can get a miner to do it because it's consensus valid, but you're not going to be able to get it around the network, right? So everyone stayed inside that limit. There were op returns all the time, but they would never be bigger than 83 bytes. And that was it. And Knots had 42 bytes instead, because that was an older limit that Luke never changed in Knots. And everyone suddenly was like, well, this is censorship. And I was saying, well, wait a minute, you're doing the same thing just to a different degree. Like, no one is running completely laissez-faire mempool policies that just say everything is equal, go ahead and do all of it. No one is. And so when people I'm saying ideologically, we may disagree on paper, but in reality, what you're doing with your node that you run in completely default settings is ideologically aligned with me. It's just you haven't actually taken the time to look at what your node is doing. And then there were projects like Libra Relay that Peter Todd came out with, where it's like, actually, we do want to have the ideological opposite position, where we say there is no difference between arbitrary data and financial activity. And that was a new concept that entered the fray. And I'm like, fair enough if that's your position. But all we were doing when we came out with a more hostile attitude to arbitrary data was, we felt, completely congruent with how Bitcoin's worked forever, since the op return wars, since Satoshi's time, even when he was talking about things we can do to minimize people trying to store JPEGs and MP4s in the chain. This has always had reasonable precedent. I think I didn't do a very good job of explaining it when Ocean launched, and my knowledge wasn't really there yet. But as time has progressed, I've become more and more convinced that it was completely reasonable for us to do it, and that it just was a marketing fail. And again, I'm going to take most of the responsibility for that.
I would also want to point out that Liber Relay is kind of just a LARP because it still has most of the spam filters in place. It just removed the one up return limit.
Well, we'll get into
I was
that
going to mention
plan
that,
B.
but yeah.
I mean, look, I think at the end of the day, like, one of the most beautiful things about Bitcoin is that you get to choose what you run, right? And I think mempool policy is a particularly strong example of that, because it pretty much only affects yourself. And if you want to run a different mempool policy than some, if you want to, you can run no mempool, and that's your prerogative. The network should still function as designed. I do think there is a concern that you end up in a situation. I think it's mostly a straw man, or mostly, I don't know if straw man is the right word. Maybe it's like it's one of it's like a borderline straw man where you have like this theoretical argument that probably will never happen in real life, but then people make you argue against it anyway, which is more or less, I think, the definition of a straw man. But this idea that I think, as Bitcoiners, we do want, in general, the majority of transactions going through like standard mempool relays around the world. Just like people actually, like independent node runners relaying these transactions around the world, rather than like the extreme example of being like 90% of transactions are just going straight to the pool and like no one sees them. I think that would be a net negative. I don't think we really can comprehend like what the knock-on effects of that type of situation at scale for a while is. But I think also in practice, like, that probably will never happen.
And it can't happen if mining is decentralized.
Yeah,
Because the pool is no longer making those decisions.
Yeah, if you have, that sounds like a pool problem rather than a P2P problem. Like, if there is only one pool, whether you have a mempool or not, that's a massive issue.
Right, but I mean, I guess my point is like there's something beautiful about the fact that we don't broadcast directly to pools.
Yeah.
For the most part, the majority of transactions, right? You
You don't know
broadcast.
if you are or not.
Well, that's
my point, right? Is like, but you're just broadcasting it to the network. It's getting relayed, it's getting relayed around nodes, and like eventually it gets to a miner that mines the transaction.
Yeah, and that's an important part of that's your power as a node. Is one of the many things that happens if you run a node is that you are relaying stuff that you think belongs in the chain, and you're helping decentralize the communication between people that want to use the chain and people that put stuff in the chain. That's decentralized via the P2P layer. And yeah, you wouldn't want to degrade it, but it's every single person on it is a sovereign individual. And if they're saying, like my node, I have a couple of nodes, right? They don't relay anything. One of them relays op return. The others don't even relay that. They don't relay arbitrary data, right? And they're both set. They're both set to 42 bytes. But that 42 bytes of data carrying includes the new kind that came along after, the combo of SegWit and Taproot that allowed them, all the stuff to get outside what data carrier normally pertain to. And that's my vote, right? Like, this is my mempool. There are others like it, but this one is mine. Like, it's if miners find out about this stuff, they didn't find out about it from me, and I have no reason really to put it in there, and it's definitely not going to make any difference to fee estimation. So I think, yeah, keeping all that in mind, that seems to me a logical way for miners to for people running nodes to operate on the network. I think it's overblown, the idea that there's any fee estimation issues as a result, and
It actually improves the estimation if you use the better spam filters, because then you're no longer looking and saying, why didn't that transaction get in the chain?
that is true. If the minute there's a pool like Ocean that exists as well, like, but I'm not getting into the weeds of that one. I'm gonna start falling over myself trying to explain it.
Do you want to get into the weeds, Luke?
Yeah, I mean, good fee estimation algorithms look at what transactions you saw when they were broadcast, and then which ones got mined, how long it took them to get mined. And if you're including spam in your memory pool, and they're not getting mined, it's going to look like maybe they didn't have enough fee or who knows what, and it's going to skew your fee estimation to think that you have to pay more than you might really actually have to. But if you filter the spam, then you're just not paying it any attention. You're only looking at the transactions that are most likely going to get mined by everybody.
Interesting. So the to have the most accurate fee estimation, if it works that way, you want to make sure you're only accepting transactions that are most likely to get in the chain.
Right, and even Bitcoin Core, when it accepts transactions, if it thinks that it's something abnormal about it, it will exclude it from fee estimation, which it doesn't work in the spam case because it's got the bug with the spam filters. But there are other cases where, until recently, all RBF transactions were ignored for fee estimation.
Oh, that's interesting about the RBF stuff. I mean, what about the argument? I'm kind of curious. So, like, I mean, I think part of it matters, like what percentage of these transactions there are, and it matters how high the fee is of these transactions. And in our current situation, they've seemed to once again. I don't want to jinx us into UTXO bloat, but it seems to like mostly faded out. But I mean, I think a decent example would be like the 20 blocks following the halving. Like, do you not see the argument that let's say Datum existed at that point? Let's say Datum existed at that point, and I'm constructing my own blocks as a miner. I would like to see those transactions, right? Like, what you're just gonna not
Well,
transactions?
those transactions had a high fee, but they weren't actually spam transactions for the most part. They would have been, if Ocean had found a block, they would have been in there.
Yeah, I mean that's another thing. I mean, there were some the
Because they weren't
template on,
inscriptions.
the default template on Ocean still it doesn't filter all data. It enforces the original limit of 42 bytes, and it originally up until recently would also allow that with the, I forget what that flag was called, but like non-standard data carrier or something like that, which was basically inscription. So most of those were in Ocean's block. I mean, it's what we were trying to mine because they actually stayed within that limit for the most part, and a lot of the current data carrying stuff does stay within that limit. So you'll see a lot of that in some of Ocean's blocks. Now, we also give the template option of not mining any of that, and some people do that. And then Datum gives you the full option to do whatever, if you want to mine them or not. And that's up to you. And I love that. It's not our problem. If you want to mine it, you mine it. If you don't, you don't.
Yeah, there's ARB data and there's ARB data, and there's bug abuse and there's non-standard use, right? Like Ocean's blocks contain a lot of op return data at the moment. I believe that's mostly just what people call runes. And
Yeah.
while I don't like 90% of block space being, op return stuff, at the same time, it is the least harmful kind of ARB data we've seen over the last year and a half by far. Right, ordinals was an attack on fungibility, which is insane. Like Bitcoin's money, and if you try and say that one sat doesn't equal one sat, that's like that. You might as well start attacking 21 million as well. It's that fundamental. Like if you try and turn it into a collectible, so that different sats are at different amounts, you lose the entire efficiency of what money is in the first place, because everything becomes barter again. You have to value each unit of it independently, and you have to subscribe to some centralized interpretation.
Yeah, because it's not even inherent to on-chain stuff either.
Yeah, and also it's nothing to do with Bitcoin.
I mean,
it's like
ordinals just don't even exist, but yeah.
KYC is an imposed interpretation on top of Bitcoin. It's like that's a good Bitcoin, that's a bad Bitcoin. We know that undermines the neutrality of the currency, right? So ordinals was like its own kind of terrible. Then you had what was it called? The stamps one, which was just intentionally bloating the UTXO set. And that went from 90 million in 2022 to 200 million by the end of 2023. And now you can't sync a node on a Pi 4 anymore just because of that. So like that was like a major detriment. The stuff that's mostly making it in blocks at the moment doesn't do that. It doesn't attack fungibility, and it doesn't bloat the UTXO set.
And this is runes?
Yeah. So I'm just like, I don't mind that as much, right? Because treating it all as equal is like, again, some spam is worse than others.
You know what this is? Go on, Jason.
I was going to say, on the technical side, I mean, you have to keep in mind there's been the compromise in place for years to allow op return, and they went within the framework of that, and everybody was already on board with it. Not that anybody wants that to be a thing. I mean, to me, ideally, Bitcoin is financial transactions and nothing else. And if there were ever a way to enforce that at the consensus level, that'd be great. I don't think we're anywhere near that. But
is that even possible?
There's ways to hard fork to do it, but maybe even soft fork to do it. But I don't know how we could do it.
It's technically a soft fork, but socially it'd be kind of a hard fork because you'd break all the old addresses.
Right, exactly. So I mean, it's doable, but would it ever happen? I don't know. But anyway,
in practice, I agree with that too.
Yeah, not to defend the runes or anything like that, but they are still sitting in that compromised framework, and that's been around for a while, and they're there, and it's not as harmful.
The worst part of the runes is this bug they have for minting new ones, where everyone who makes a bid gets their bid mined instead of just the winner.
Right. It almost seems like there should be like a consensus level thing that people add on for it, but then that would be endorsing it and probably a mess anyway. But at least it's not something that's bloating the UTXO. It's not. It's just adding the data, which is annoying, but at the same time, we kind of tolerate it.
Yeah, I mean, you guys know a lot about all these shitcoin shit. It reminds me of when I had to do a deep dive on the stacks bullshit just to argue against everybody.
Yep.
So I feel for you.
Hey Matt, just to chime in, you mentioned the high fees after the halving. One of the ironic things is that a lot of the focus was on the filtering spam, potentially resulting in lower revenues in the blocks, which I think Jason's been sort of monitoring. Like every single block we found, with and without the spam has been within a fraction of a percent in terms of overall revenue that a miner sees.
Yeah.
However, the FPPS payout mechanism, which is what all the other pools use, is completely breaks down when you see a high transaction fee environment, because algorithmically what they do is every day, every 144 block period, the three highest paying blocks are removed as outliers from the calculation, and miners hash price is a result of the average of whatever's left over. So miners have, Mechanic mentioned this earlier, but miners have been telling us that, hey, I'm earning 10% more than this pool. I'm earning 15% more, 7% more. That money is coming as a result of these, lopping off the top of these.
Right.
They're
almost like paying out the median. So when you have these super high payout blocks, you're just missing all of it.
That's exactly what they do.
And something else, when you look at the ocean blocks kind of compared to we have multiple templates. So if you compare the core template to the default template, sometimes the default wins in fees because of just the transaction packing algorithms able to get different transactions in that end up amounting to more fees. And it doesn't happen all that often, but it does happen because that's just how it works. So the argument that ocean miners earn less because we have some kind of data carrier filter or something like that on the default is kind of crazy.
No, I mean, just going back to what Mechanic was saying earlier. Like, I think long term, like if you guys survive and continue momentum and scale up and keep like slow and steady accumulating hash, like I think it won't take too long before it'll be really obvious that you make more money mining on Ocean, which unfortunately,
Right.
for unfortunate or good, is probably a stronger argument than freedom for most people.
Sure.
It is the strongest argument. It's just make more money. But that makes sense to me. I mean, I think at the end of the day, like I'm pretty sure like everyone on this call agrees on 99%. And I just want to say just straight up, like I'm just really grateful that you guys have been building out Ocean and that you exist. And there would be a lot darker timeline in Bitcoin right now if you didn't. I mean, before we wrap, I have one last topic for you guys. It's a topic that's near and dear to my heart, which is well, I mean, maybe not mempools. Just the amount of Bitcoin transactions in general. Like, how do you guys think about that? Like, just Bitcoin on-chain transaction activity. I mean, I've specifically have said, I have a bet with Marty, my co-host on my other show, Rabbit Hole Recap, that goes all the way to the next halving. That I say mempools will not clear before next halving. But even with that said, I'm like a little bit disappointed in the lack of real whatever. That's where all the argument comes, is like, what is real transaction volume? But financial transaction volume on chain, like considering we have, the largest asset manager in the world, BlackRock is shilling the coin and has their ETF, and it seems like Bitcoin has grown up in so many different ways, but it feels like transaction volume hasn't really, and it's not something you can necessarily very objectively measure. But I'm just curious. I mean, particularly Jason and Luke, who have been in the space for such a long time, like how do you grapple with that? Like some days, like I wake up and I'm just like, I send so many on-chain transactions. Like, is there just like 15 of us that are just doing it? Like, what's going on there?
I don't know if Luke wants to jump in before me, but there's definitely more than 15. And if you look back at like a lot of the Eligius blocks from the back in the day, like you would see a lot of blocks from that era were not full. Like they weren't packed to the brim full of transactions because there weren't transactions to put in them.
Yeah.
And that is normal. Like there may be a
There was
time
like
where
nobody back then.
well, not even that. Like there were exchanges, and there were other things that were generating transaction volume that may or may not have been like actual people doing so. I mean, there was a lot of automation happening, but like there were blocks that were not full, and I don't think that should be a scary thing. If the mempool clears, quote unquote.
No, I never say the mempool clears. I say mempools clear.
Right.
There's always
So-
a mess again. I'm
Trigger.
very pedantic. I'm very pedantic about the fact that there's many mempools.
I
Right.
can't believe you said the mempool, Jason.
Yeah, well, I did the air quotes thing for anybody who's just listening. I don't... but yeah, so I don't think that should be a scary thing if there aren't a huge amount of transactions to mine. I don't think that's necessarily saying that there aren't people transacting with Bitcoin, because you have to think that, like, a transaction in Bitcoin, I mean, you can have a less than 1 kilobyte transaction that sends the equivalent of $1, and you can have the same size transaction in a block that sends $1 billion. I mean, there's a big distinction there. So I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean that people aren't transacting. And Luke was about to jump in, it sounded like.
Yeah, if you look at all the spam that's been going on the last year, it seems pretty apparent that we would be doing just fine with 300K block sizes.
Exactly.
I was with. I gave you the T-ball question for that. I'm just to be clear, like one of the metrics when I look at Bitcoin that is hard to fake, is just fee-paying transactions, right? It's like, I mean, we've seen in the past like the IOTAs of the world, like all these shit coins that have come and gone that are like, oh, we have like amazing transaction per seconds, like all this shit. And it's like at the end of the day, it's like, okay, well, I mean, you can fake that if you have a completely centralized network and you have 2 nodes. You can send millions of transactions just back and forth between yourself, and you're not paying any fees. But once you start having fee-paying transactions there's a real cost to doing it, and then that's actually an objective measurement.
Right.
So when I think about the health of the network, a lot of the times, and this is not like I mean, it's not something I track. It's something I like just gut emotionally feel about. Is fee paying transactions and the quantity of fee paying transactions and how often they're happening, and to me it's one of those metrics that just seems to be lagging behind everything else. And I'm not giving the Bcash argument because holding is using. I'm not saying like you need to spend Bitcoin. I'm just saying like if it's actually your fucking money, you're probably spending it, and it's objectively true, particularly if you're paying transaction fees.
I guess.
I
Oh,
think I have the same like concern. Like I've been around in Bitcoin for long enough that there's certain ideas that are supposed to transpire at some point. Like the small blocker argument was miners are going to carry on mining because there'll be so much transaction fees you won't need subsidy anymore, and it isn't really happening. But at the same time, subsidy is still 3.125 Bitcoin every 10 minutes. That's a lot of money. We're many halvings away from needing to prove that, you know, even if people that want to frame it as a security budget thing, that is a problem that de facto needs solving. I don't even know if I agree with that necessarily. I used to worry about it, and it used to be one of my rationales for small blocks. But if and when that problem manifests as being real, and if and when we prove that the theory around transaction fees filling the hole that subsidy has left behind, that we are still at least a decade or two away from that actually needing to be something we have to address. So at the moment, 3.125 Bitcoin is enough, and it's 99% of what miners take home.
I mean,
I guess
don't-
to kind of jump on your original question of like what kind of volume is out there, I guess a good metric is like running a default NOTs node with the 300 kilobyte blocks. And I do run one like myself to see that. And that node is in no danger of running out of transactions to mine. Even with
do you think
the full spam filtering, I would never not have a 300 kilobyte block to mine, and
so,
that block
Jason?
would, yeah.
Do you think on that node config, mempools will never clear again?
I don't want to say never. I don't want to say never. It's very possible that.
Will we hit a point? Will we hit a point where there'll just always be a backlog?
Well, when's the last time where we mined an empty block
That was not like just a bullshit empty block.
No, yeah,
It's been
just
a
like a
while.
real empty block, because the network found a block. Then a couple of minutes later, there were just no transactions in that time, so that next block was also empty. Has that ever happened? I mean, after like 2010.
I was going to say it's been at least a couple of years since I've seen it, but it has happened. It's
the terms of our bet is like three not full blocks worth of like transactions.
I don't
Because
know.
you're right.
I'm
Like
the worst
if you want
predictor,
to hit people with semantics, it's like what is a clear? But
right.
Yeah, because you never know if there's someone else with a couple of transactions that are sitting there, right? Like you just don't know, and someone is always going to have a longer history on their mempool than you might have.
If you're going to lose that bet, you just send a few transactions, right?
Yeah.
There you go. Yeah.
I mean, I just think you're not bullish on Bitcoin if you think we will never be in a situation like there is classic Bitcoin, right? Where I was being provocative. I just wanted people to make sure that they had good UTXO management and were thinking about like long-term fees, in terms of UTXO size and whatnot. And the best way to do that was to be provocative. But like in classic Bitcoin fashion, like there was a lot of counter, which is like mempools will always clear. That you'll always be able to get 1 sat per byte in eventually at some point. And I feel like, first of all, I think we're never going to have another block size increase. That's insane to me. And I think we're always going to have more Bitcoin users, and more people are going to rely on it as their actual money. And as a result, if you do all three of those things, eventually we're going to be in a situation where there's going to be a forever backlog of transactions.
Sure.
And fundamentally, like that's how I think about Bitcoin. And maybe it's already happening and we're at the very early stages of it and it's very low, or maybe it's still going to be a couple of years down the road. But
I like the way you put it, because in my opinion, anyone that speaks in terms of certainty with what's going to happen is blowing smoke up your ass. No one knows exactly what Bitcoin looks like in a couple of decades. There are different scenarios. Like the Covenants bros are telling you everyone's just going to be using JP Morgan wallet to move their money around because no one will be able to afford on chain. Other people are saying, no, of course, they're all going to fall back to 1 sat per byte. That's inevitable. Like there's just different perspectives on it. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you I know what the future is. And I don't think anyone does.
I agree.
Yeah, I mean, I think eventually we probably will get to the point where we don't see 1 sat per VByte anymore. I don't know if that's now, whether or not we're going to like hit that low again before that happens. But I mean, ultimately, if Bitcoin's going to be adopted long term, that will probably necessarily need to happen, and we'll have to have like layer 2 stuff like Lightning or other solutions like that to handle the bulk of like smaller transactions and stuff, because you won't be able to get a lot of that in chain. And I think that's one of the big things about decentralizing templates, is giving the miners control over the block space again, so that when that becomes a thing and you need to be able to get a transaction in the block space, you need a way to do that without having to just go to a pool. So that just kind of circling back to the whole theme of decentralization there.
Okay, guys. Well, thanks for having a bit of fun with me at the end there.
Sure.
I know time is scarce, so I think we should wrap. Let's do some final thoughts. Luke, are you still with us? Final thoughts.
Yep, Hurricane hasn't taken me out yet.
Is that that's your final thought? That's good. I'm happy for you. Do you have a final thought for us besides? Yeah, you have another hurricane coming, dude. Race up. Do you have any final thoughts to the audience on the topic of Ocean and making Bitcoin great again?
I don't know.
I respect it. Let's go to Mechanic. Final thoughts.
Yeah, I think Bitcoin is always the alignment of doing what's right and making a lot of money if you have conviction about that, or getting distracted and playing silly games and losing money. So Ocean is really reminiscent of that. The people that came with us were mostly ideological about it. They wanted the transparency, they wanted the trustlessness, permissionlessness, KYC free, all that stuff. And then they just made loads more money than the other pools as well. So I was like, beautiful. That's just the way Bitcoin works, right?
Love that. Let's go with Mark. Final thoughts.
Yeah, we started the Ocean, resurrected Eligius mainly with the goal of decentralizing the intelligent parts of mining. This was the mission, and along the way, we learned that miners can actually make a lot more money mining Bitcoin when you remove the middleman. So this is kind of like one of the the nice coincidences that has happened, is like, not only are we helping miners to be more in control, back in the power position, more sovereign, but they can actually make a lot more money too. So we're definitely the practical pool for miners that are concerned about the bottom line.
Badass. Thank you, Mark. Jason, final thoughts.
I think everybody summed it up pretty well. But one of the things that's interesting is that until Ocean came along, since Eligius was around, there wasn't a way to compare a lot of this stuff. Like, there wasn't a transparent pool, and there wasn't a way to know like that you were kind of dealing with that middleman with the existing pools, and it's opened the eyes of a lot of people. And I think as more people jump on board and realize that that's going to be a big thing, the transparency aspect, and then just adding even more to that to give the miners even more sovereignty. It's definitely going to be a big thing.
I love it. Well, I want to thank you guys. I also want to shout out Ian, the only co-founder not to join us. He's awesome. And thank you guys for building. Thank you guys for keep pushing forward on Ocean. Thank you for joining us on the episode. I know I personally will be recommending Ocean to any miner that asks me which pool they should mine with. We need to get that hash rate up. And I think you guys are the best place to mine. So let's make it happen. So thank you guys, and keep carrying on.
Thanks so much for having us, man.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, man.
Cheers.
Our world is chaotic, but life found its way by channeling energy to bring order to chaos. It is in our nature to seek signals amongst noise because it is through communication and exchange that we evolve beyond the darkness of chaos into the dawn of civilization. Our evolution thrives in exchange of all the info we try to convey. They flow through to the marketplace and form the signals to regulate how we coordinate where things need to be. Price speaks, so we learn to compete. This drives us to efficiently shape the world with our voice. Now let the market speak. So we build, we sow, we trade, we grow to meet our wants and needs. We specialize to drive from the mind our creations into reality. We make progress in our process to get more for less, advancing society. We brought forth dawn of the age of technology that harnessed the energy to reach prosperity. Our money embodies the power to reap what we sow, so the market becomes a channel for our collective energy to flow. When value is traded for value, we are aligned and so we evolve. This is how, amidst uncertainty, life continues to grow. But the dawn of tech gave rise to light speed information exchange. So to transact fast, we further abstract money from energy constraints and became more aligned on a few large entities to coordinate trade, concentrating the power, resources, and authority to create more and more of our money, distorting its signals, eroding its worth, and throwing us back into the darkness of chaos. When we destroy the mechanism of money, we destroy our ability to navigate through uncertainty. And when we can't trade value freely and directly, we must trust the few to govern the many. What happens when all our means center around an authority? Complexity builds, now coordination relies on conformity. Observe our thoughts, to censor dissent and coerce our actions. Can there be true innovation when there's no freedom of expression? What happens to our voice, the ones that shape social discourse? Now whose ideas gets created and which problems get solved? If our progress depends on hearing many sides to resolve, then why would we suppress the voice that shapes how humanity evolves? When we cut off the perspectives that make up society, we lose sight of the truth that forms our entire reality. Each person's contribution builds up our resiliency. Did we forget these differences are what strengthens humanity? When communication breaks, our words turn to silence. Our acts become violent and the world is divided amongst darkness. Truth is twisted by our pain and our bias, eroding the common ground, making us more and more fragile. To navigate uncertainty, we must solve for robustness. So everything gets tried and tested by various efforts until we discover the system that best coordinates us, mirrors life's process of channeling energy to create signal from chaos. In the era of technology, we transform energy into computational power to process the noise of free markets into structured order. And just by looking at numbers, we can derive how much power is required to reduce chaos and inscribe a flow of value for all to verify that our transactions happened in line with shared rules. We don't need to seek trust when we can see proof. It is real-time consensus that aligns us to evolve. This is how, amidst uncertainty, our lives continue to grow. When we uphold our own rules, we preserve our own worth and defend our own voice, which lets the true market emerge. The strength of the design lies in each of our participation, since we are the nodes that channel our energy end to end. As we claim responsibility to uphold our own rights, we radiate the power that brings our truth into light. And when that dawn of light touches all parts of the globe, and it ripples throughout society, and it returns us the hope that becomes the power that sparks humanity to thrive, that same power that fuels the creation of the mind. And when our mind and our money are truly set free and they transcend the limits of past boundaries, now knowing becomes owning and ideas become wealth. What happens now? We can all push to expand the edges of our existence. It is through evolution when things are the hardest. As we head for the light, we have to push through the darkness. It is in these moments we do what we do best. We take the chaos and the darkness and use our power to create. It is in these moments when we're all in alignment and our freedom of difference ascends us to a